Okay, I'm David Glyn, President of GASi, and it's the third Friday in May. This is the yearly beat of the Foulkes lecture, the third Friday in May. Next year, it'll be the 17th of May. In 2025, it'll be the 16th of May. We suppose, we hope, we imagine. 5 years ago, the first Foulkes lecture I introduced as president, it was Friday, the 18th of May, 2018. I remember that I mentioned a dream that I'd had the night before. Like the best dreams, I can't recall it now. But I have an idea that it was something to do with struggling through the birth canal. Naturally, I wanted to tell you another dream for my last introduction, but I have none for you. Dreams have their own calendar. We keep the beat. It marks our persistence, our renewal. It reminds us that we are still learning and developing, that we have things to tell one another and matters to discuss. Many work hard to bring us to this point. The lecturer, the respondents, the organizers, the technicians, and our administrator. And then there is the work of the participants to be here, and the work that is to come of listening, thinking, and responding. Always there are those who are returning and those who are arriving for the first time. We welcome those who are here in person and those who are participating online. For you online participants, we have tried to improve the process. We have a team of technicians here who've worked very hard all afternoon to set up the lights and the cameras. We continue to learn how to achieve a better experience of meeting in person and online. And we look forward to hearing from you who are online about what your experience has been. And then there are always those who cannot join us and those who will not return because they have died since the last beat. Morris Nitzen died in November, and Miriam suggested that we use one of Morris's paintings, which you will have seen in the publicity for her lecture. And a memorial events are planned later in the year in December, and details will be circulated. 2 other members have died this year that I'm aware of. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Giovanni Losito in Italy and Claire Berger, who died very recently. The Foulkes lecture has always been in London at the Institute of Education, Regent's College, SOAS, and lately here in Senate House. Those are the places that I remembered. We want to reflect the international growth of the society, and we are just beginning to explore the possibility of organizing the event in a different country at some time in the near future, always naturally on the third Friday in May. Now I'm going to ask Carla to introduce Miriam.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening for those who are watching us from online. We are all together experiencing this hybrid event, which is not so easy to organize, but we are also trying to do our best to be connected with people online. So be welcome, people online, and be welcome, people face to face. I'm gonna, with a huge pleasure that I introduce our dearest Miriam Berger from Israel, who will deliver the Foulkes Lecture 2023 with the topic, Facts Matter, the Analytic Group Between Witnessing and Horizontality. Miriam Berger is a senior clinical psychologist and group analyst. She is co-founder and former co-chairperson of the Israeli Institute of Group Analysis and a member of its teaching staff. She is an initiator, founder, and former clinical director of the training program for clinical psychologists, NAMCHA Tel Aviv, an organization established for the psychotherapy of Holocaust survivors and their families. She has published papers in psychoanalytic journals and book chapters about the treatment and clinical supervision of post-traumatic disorders. She co-authored with Ivan Urlich and Eva Avi Berman, Victimhood, Vengefulness, and Culture of Forgiveness, which has been translated in several languages. She is a psychotherapist and a supervisor in various settings and in private practice. So it's with a huge and touching pleasure that I give the word to Miriam Berger. It's an honor to have you with us.
Good evening, everybody. Am I supposed to be holding this in my hand also? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Carla, for your kind words, and David for the introduction. I'd like to express my gratitude to the International Group Analytic Society for inviting me to deliver the Foulkes lecture this year. It's a great honor, and I hope that I'll deserve it. So I have a few thanks about this. First of all, thanks especially to the board and its president, David Glyn, Linda Watton, the chair of the scientific committee, and Carla Penna, a member of the scientific committee and the chair of the Foulkes lecture. Thanks also to Julia Portulas for her ready help, always when we need her. Very special thanks to my many dear friends and colleagues from the Israeli Institute of Group Analytic Society. For the many friends and colleagues from the Israeli Group Analytic Institute who have been with me through these trying times, and your kind and supportive help was really invaluable to me. Thanks to my beloved family, my children, Michal and Udi, my grandchildren, Naama and Ido, who put up with me always joyfully. And last but not least, to all of you who are here online and in person, many thanks. I hope I didn't forget anyone. If I did, I apologize. So the title of my lecture is Facts Matter, the analytic group between witnessing and horizontality. I would like to start with a few words about the meaning of the title, which may seem slightly obscure. I'm aware that questions about what constitutes facts are subject to endless complexities. These questions relate to philosophical, theological, and psychoanalytic beliefs about truth, knowledge, ethics, and the like. At times, they arouse heated disputes which may easily evolve into bitter ideological clashes and may even end up in bloodshed. Without reducing the significance of such epistemic questions, I wish to take up the notion of facts in the ordinary, everyday sense of the word and relate them to shared human reality, which can be observed, verified, and validated. I will now relate to the sound of fallen trees, to facts, and to shared reality. Let us take another look at the well-known metaphysical question. Does a tree falling in a forest make a sound if nobody is there to hear it? In the ordinary, everyday world, the answer is simple and definite. If nobody is there to hear and to respond, the falling becomes a non-event. I suggest that such non-events do have consequences. The absence of a responding other can precipitate an experience of an emotional abyss which sends out its own powerful vibrations. The non-response generates a terrifying experience of helplessness and a bearable dread of what Winnicott referred to as falling forever, with no one to hold on to. Throughout his work, Winnicott urged us to take external objective reality seriously. He stated that, I open a quote, external reality has breaks on it and can be studied and known. In fact, fantasy is only tolerable at full blast when objective reality is appreciated well. End of quote. As I see it, witnessing by others who validate that what happened represents a crucial component of the breaks that objective reality provides. The act of witnessing fosters the experience of a shared reality, which Winnicott saw as a basis for the development of human concern. Thus, the live presence of a responsive other, namely a witness, is essential to transform the dread precipitated by the non-event into something bearable and tolerable. This validation is a crucial component of the capacity for reality testing personally and collectively. I suggest that the notion of horizontality is also a crucial component of these processes. For now, I will say briefly that my thinking on horizontality has been inspired by a recent book edited by Ashur and Berman titled Sibling Relations and Horizontal Axis in Theory and Practice. They underline the notion of the horizontal axis as an essential foundational dimension in every aspect of human sociality. Following the ideas presented in this book, with its many valuable contributions, I suggest that the concept of horizontality offers us a view on what people actually do laterally with each other in real time. It directs us to adopt a concerted look into the cyclic nature embedded in human sociality. When related to the analytic group, horizontality offers us a perspective which opens up an ever-growing awareness of the multi-directional, lived, interactive processes which unfold among members of the group. It unravels the relational consequences of their past traumatic experiences and enables them to become active participants in each other's healing. Going back to the title of this presentation, the phrase "facts matter" is my take on Black Lives Matter, a social movement that began in the United States to protest incidents of police brutality and racially motivated violence against Black people. It seeks to highlight racism, discrimination, and inequality against Blacks and against minorities in general. In this context, skin color, whether Black, white, or any other shade, represents a vast range of identifiable, recognizable facts, which I believe are far from being only skin deep. This is by no means a claim against exploring one's inner world. I do not think that my emphasis on the real detracts from the value of exploring one's inner psyche. Rather, it is a plea to hold in mind both inner and outer realities without resorting to polarized views that usually end up discrediting each other. This tension has dogged psychoanalysis since Freud, especially with regard to the origins of trauma. The dichotomy between inner drive-related factors on the one hand and external environmental factors on the other is present to this day. Following Foulkes, such polarities evolve into dichotomies that distort our work and endangers its moral basis. Well, facts like skin color or a host of other observable traits mark one's unique individuality. Conversely, they mark one as different and so consequently can exclude, discriminate, and subjugate. Individuals and groups categorized as different are banished daily from the matrix of concern. In other words, the different ones just do not matter. A short quote from the voluminous diaries of Victor Klemperer conveys the nature of facts I relate to. We had a friendly conversation. The man shook my hand, told me to keep my spirits up. The next day, he stared ahead as he went past, as much a stranger as possible. Victor Klemperer was a German scholar, professor at the University of Dresden, born in 1881 in Poland to Jewish parents. Klemperer, who eventually converted to Christianity and married a German woman, felt very much part of the society into which he had assimilated. The insidious process of exclusion from German society, which he saw as his natural home, his village, was shattering. His journals are considered one of the most detailed testimonies containing rich and accurate descriptions of daily life in Germany between 1933 and 1945. They provide a look at the deep state of inhumanity, of totalitarian regime, and at the mundane onset of inhumanity in a civil, so-called normative society, which becomes accustomed to prolonged evil and violence until these are firmly lodged in people's day-to-day lives. I now return to group analysis. Foulkes stressed the importance of observable evidence in clinical practice. He believed that the readiness of group members to become vulnerable to the eyes of each other is healing in itself. Foulkes stated lucidly. Quote, group analytic psychotherapy is not a hunt for unconscious meaning. Only when we cannot elucidate satisfactorily what happens or what is being said on the evidence of their manifest presentation do we have to search for concealed and distorted motives and have to analyze and interpret. Close quote. This quote implies that the injuries which have unconsciously shaped one's relationships tend to be played out between group members in real time. Thus, they become available for translation, which is Foulkes' version of interpretations. To put it differently, the vertical axis, which describes parent-child relations, presents itself in the horizontal axis, which describes relations between equals, and vice versa. It is their convergence which opens up a reflective space for members and conductor alike. I will now turn to the notion of the horizontal axis and sibling relations as explored by Juliet Mitchell. She suggests that the law of the mother is aimed at preventing incest and harmful acts between siblings. Yet, even when the mother succeeds in keeping her law, she is faced with the necessity of nursing the new baby and almost unavoidably expels the older one into outer world of peers by handing him over to other caretakers. The creation of the horizontal axis is based on the transition of children into social reality. Ashwag and Berman, drawing on Mitchell's ideas, underline that once the horizontal axis has been created, it becomes independent from the vertical one. I suggest that the view horizontally affords, joined by the live presence entailed by mutual witnessing in the analytic group, is an essential part of the transpersonal communication to which Foulkes referred. He saw this idea as connoting conscious and unconscious connectedness, which go through the individual similar to X-rays in the physical sphere, forming an endopsychic common union between primary worlds. This connectedness creates a basis for restoring one's sense of belonging to a social matrix of mutual concern. At this point, let me illustrate what is entailed by witnessing and horizontality with a vignette from a group session. Diane describes yet another devastating experience of feeling excluded by her husband and their two daughters. The table is set for dinner, and as usual, husband and daughters plunge into a lively conversation about an outing from which they have just returned. Diane tries in vain to get involved. Her husband disregards her attempts. He continues as if she does not exist. She starts crying. Husband and girls become very quiet, and an odd smile appears on his face. She feels mortified. Later on, she says, he told me that he has nothing to do with my difficulties, that I'm the one who must work it out for myself. I know him. He always smiles like that when he is embarrassed. A number of group members respond, identifying with Diane's pain. Then Eric, his voice muffled with anger, says, your husband is a brute and sadistic too. Shame on him. Don't let him do this to you. Diane starts crying. He always gets back to me with these cliches of his when I try to confront him. I become frightened and shut up. Following this exchange, the discourse in the group proceeds in a different key. Members relate more directly and personally to each other. Diane is no longer the only one who struggles with the fear of confronting hidden, disguised, aggressive attacks. A sense of vitality and connectedness prevails in the group. I would like to stress that witnessing is not a given. It requires that the witness trusts the account of the injured person and validates it without losing his or her boundaries as a separate individual. This emphasis on boundaries is especially important. The stance of witnessing is not to be mistaken for an unconditional acceptance of an other's subjective truth. The witness' ability to confirm that external reality does in fact exist depends on their capacity to maintain a good enough balance between sameness and difference. The ongoing struggle to contain the inevitable tensions between connectedness and separateness without excluding either of them is part of what shared reality is made up of. Klemperer's diaries, his meticulous prosaic account of daily life under oppression, joins many other testimonies to unbearable suffering and cruelty. Marie's painful outcry, what happened, happened, but that it happened cannot be so easily accepted is an act of rebellion against silence and despair. It is a protest against the collapse of human caring. At the same time, it conveys the hope that someday this cry will be heard and believed, that it will actually make a difference. So here in a nutshell is what I have in mind about facts. They matter, just as the obliteration of facts matters. In other words, the absence of witnessing expressed through non-recognition, denial, or silence becomes a fact in its own right. For now, I leave these complexities and turn to my personal experience with witnessing. In a 2011 paper entitled The Ethics of Trauma, Nguyen claims that it behooves trauma workers of all kinds to be in a state of empathic unsettlement. I think that my prolonged state of empathic unsettlement is probably rooted in my history as a child born in Poland in the ghetto of Krakow. A couple of weeks before it was finally liquidated in March 1943. A Polish woman, a devout Catholic, risked her life and the lives of her family when she took in a Jewish infant, an infant that was otherwise doomed. Her surname was Oshikova, my godmother in every sense. I suppose that my preoccupation with issues of evil, justice, accountability, and recognition starts somewhere there in Krakow, among the executioners, the victims, the rescuers, neighbors, friends, and ordinary people who stood by while the human world collapsed. I was too young to remember most of my early years in Krakow, or to grasp the enormity of their impact. However, one of the events I do remember seems worth presenting here in detail, as it relates more directly to witnessing and horizontality. For some time in post-war Poland, armed nationalistic gangs were on a hunt for Jews. The war was over, yet it was still dangerous to be identified as a Jew. In the summer of 1947, when I was about 4 years old, my parents decided to spend a vacation in Rabka, a well-known resort in the Tatra Mountains. They rented a house with a few friends, all survivors like themselves. A word about my family in the Holocaust. My mother had managed to escape the ghetto of Krakow with forged Aryan papers shortly after my birth. My father, who was part of the renowned Schindler's List, was finally liberated from Brünlitz, a Nazi labor camp, in 1955. Their 5-year-old son, Gustav, my brother, perished in the ghetto in 1943. On one of the first nights of this vacation, the house was raided by a group of Polish gunmen. They shot whoever they managed to find there, killing some and wounding others. One boy, slightly older than me, hid under a bed with his father. Later, I was told that I was spared, since supposedly I had remained asleep during the attack, covered by a heavy blanket. My parents, who had gone out for dinner to a local restaurant earlier that evening, were summoned back by the police. They thought that I had been killed. Over the years, I have had some blurred recollection of what transpired in that house after the shooting was over. The shadowy Rabka scenes joined a whole saga of endless stories from over there, which filled the conversation at my parents' home. A group of friends used to meet every Saturday. They played cards and talked. They formed a closed circle, preoccupied with names, places, dates, and events. What they talked about in Polish was horrible and alien. It had little to do with my daily life as a normal schoolgirl growing up in the newly established state of Israel. For me, the numbers tattooed on their arms were taken for granted, facts not to be questioned. Their stories felt like events that happened to some fictional characters in a remote era. I knew of them, but I didn't know them in any real sense, nor did I know myself. Growing up, my social life was totally alien to my home life. This duality encompassed two split-off realities that were conducted in two different languages. My parents never learned Hebrew. I spoke Polish at home and Hebrew outside. Dissociation, estrangement, and detachment marked my daily life. Over the years, I've learned that where genocide is concerned, a dissociative cut is a way to survive the unbearable. Being in touch with the magnitude of the destruction is shattering for victims, therapists, and societies alike. It seems that the village I was raised by at that time needed its resources to rebuild a new life, and a cut was apparently the only way for the work of repair to be done. It certainly claimed its personal social costs. Maybe worth mentioning that the Rabka shooting raid was a non-event as far as documentation is concerned. To the best of my knowledge, the killers were never found, nor sentenced in absentia. The event is not mentioned anywhere in the records of the area, namely, what happened did not happen. Rabka is described as a peaceful resort known for the pure quality of its mineral waters, especially beneficial for children. However, some years ago, I came across a brief account about that night in Rabka. It had a factual description written by that same boy who had survived by hiding under the table. His name was Jerzy Zins. His testimony consisted of one single page in a book entitled Children of the Holocaust Speak. It was a collection of 64 short texts written by Polish Jews who were children during the war. I didn't know Jerzy personally, but I knew of him. His name, Jerzy Cyns, was often mentioned around the Saturday card table. Jerzy's mother, Sabina Goldstein, her brother, and her sister-in-law were killed that night. They had tried to escape by jumping out of a window and were gunned down. The book was written in Polish. I spoke the language, but could not read it very well. Nevertheless, I studied that one page thoroughly. I learned a few facts. Jerzy was deported in 1941 to the Krakow ghetto with his family when he was 3 years old. The ghetto was liquidated on the 13th of March, 1943. Jerzy, then 5 years old, was transferred to Płaszów, a Nazi camp located on the outskirts of Krakow. He was then sent to Auschwitz alone. At the end of the war, he was brought back to Krakow to an orphanage located in Ulica Długa. The name was familiar to me from the talks at home. After a while, Jerzy's father came. He came back from Mauthausen and found him there. Later on, his mother turned up. One of the brothers and a sister-in-law has survived as well. In the summer of 1947, the reunited family joined a few friends and went to Rabka for a vacation. The shooting occurred on the 9th of August. Somehow, these few documented details turned Rabka raid into real, actual, palpable reality for me. Now, the terrible event was anchored in names, dates, and places, and facts. I was shaken. For a while, I couldn't pull myself together and stop crying. I was surprised at the intensity of the feelings that flooded me, yet this documentation filled me with a strange sense of relief. Looking back, I suppose it marked a gradual process of moving out from the grip of a twilight zone in which I must have been entrapped. Knowing the facts dispersed the phantom state which Rabka had acquired in my mind. My sense of confusion and vagueness about that night gave way to a sobering awakening. I knew that what happened, happened. I knew it did happen to me, not only to my parents. Despite the horror this document brought to light, I felt acknowledged. Jerzy's testimony represented a piece of public recognition. As such, it released me from the void which the non-event in Rabka had wrapped around me. Jerzy Cyns was a peer, a real other that I could place in external reality. Yet, he was similar to me in so many ways. I suppose that his being both same and different enabled me to experience myself as a unique subject, an I, as stated by Dory Lau, a thou is required to validate an I. In the context of the thoughts I'm presenting today, I can say that Jerzy's testimony forged a point of convergence between the vertical and the horizontal axis for me. This vital convergence suffered a mortal blow in the Holocaust. It sent child survivors to seek safety and belonging in their peer groups, away from their vertical wrecked homes. This vertical axis, which parents represent in normal growth, was experienced as weak, threatened, and threatening. Jerzy's testimony woke me up. It pulled me out from under the heavy blanket I was covered by throughout the shooting. Furthermore, something happened to the blurred image I used to have of that boy, whom I knew only by hearsay. He too turned into a real person. The one-dimensional, one-page narrative in that book of testimonies became alive. Jerzy's tragedy touched me deeply. I hope his later years brought him warmth and human compassion. I wish he would know that his voice was heard. I was puzzled by the intensity of the impact his testimony had on me. And then it occurred to me that the piece of evidence I happened to find was not just an individual matter between me and Jerzy. I realized it was part of a broader social process. Using Foulkes' notion, I could say that this unique moment of meeting constituted a nodal point in a whole network of communication in the matrix. Our meeting was part of a social field which was made up of the collective effort of mental health workers, editors, writers, publishers, activists, and numerous others who cared enough to let it be known. It occurred in the context of significant changes in the overall social order, which made it possible for Polish Jews to come out of their silence and speak more openly about their histories. My individual story was carved out of overarching socio-political processes of which I have been totally unaware. From this perspective, witnessing can be perceived as the work of an entire village. Active participation in this collective network is needed to fight against silencing and denial, personal and social. I would add that excluding, discrediting, and shaming are also the products of a collective network. Personal responsibility cannot be split off from collective accountability. Just as it takes a whole village to raise a child, it also takes a whole village to destroy one. The circle of the analytic group, a symbolic village, enables processes of witnessing and horizontality to restore the broken connection between self and others, between inner and outer realities. The idea of the group as a whole, as a curative entity, is valid, provided that its members are ready to have an honest look at themselves as well as at others. Victims are not exempt from acknowledging that they can cause pain to others. Notwithstanding, it is also important to recognize the difference between victims and perpetrators. Our reluctance to take sides may blur the distinction between right and wrong, between good and evil. As such, it serves mostly to exempt the culpable ones from their personal responsibility for their deeds. Natalia Ginzburg, a renowned Italian writer, journalist, and politician, conveys this idea clearly. In an essay titled Universal Compassion, she states that compassion, which grows out of confusion, is a poor basis for the struggle for real reparation. She perceives our modern vagueness about ethical matters as indicative of despair and exhaustion, rather than as a real search for hope and recovery. As I see it, recognition, which is an intense relational process, cannot evade facts. It requires a detailed account of who has done what to whom. Only as such can it sustain one's judgment and dignity. Reality is co-created. By this, I mean that reality is not a given. As said, Jerzy's testimony salvaged a piece of reality for me. In Paul Celan's words, reality is not simply there. It does not simply exist. It must be sought out and won. By the same token, reality or rather human reality, is lost when there's no one to seek it out with or to win it with. These thoughts echo Foulkes' vision of the healing process that the analytic group offers, namely, group members take it upon themselves to seek out each other's reality, consciously and unconsciously. They struggle relentlessly to be seen, heard, listened to, and to be real and personal to each other. Some concluding remarks. A poem by Szymborska, The End and the Beginning, conveys these thoughts expressed in her unique way. Following are some extracts from this poem. After every war, someone has to clean up. Things won't straighten themselves up after all. We'll need the bridges back and new railway stations. Sleeves will go ragged from rolling them up. In plain words, Szymborska describes the human wreckage that war causes. Her language keeps us away from the tendency of our injured minds to glorify bloodshed and dress it up with romantic eloquence. It denotes a poignant truth about the aftermath of trauma. Someone, namely each and every one of us, is called upon to clean up the mess, to acknowledge that what happened, happened, to account for it, and to take responsibility for repairing the human damage it caused. As therapists, we struggle daily to clean up the debris spread all over by the evils of man-made violence, including our own. Szymborska joins many others who care to bear witness to the horrors of war, upholding the belief that eventually an other out there will respond and be there to help and heal. Thus, paradoxically, her grim, sober poem can be perceived as part of a hopeful struggle to rehumanize our injured realities. Following Foulkes, I think that the shared reality which members of the analytic group, including the conductor, create together can enable them to find their own unique personal point of convergence between the horizontal and vertical axes. In doing so, they become each other's healers. And last but not least, this idea resonates with the more ambitious vision that Foulkes had in mind when he developed the praxis of the analytic group, namely a struggle against totalitarian regimes. I cannot conclude without adding a word about the catastrophe which we are going through in Israel. It endangers our very existence and undermines the moral foundation that the humane society, social order is based on. With this reality in mind, I join wholeheartedly Foulkes' struggle against tyranny as a citizen, as a person, and as a group analyst. Thank you.
סקסית.
כן, כן.
כל פעם אני אומרת לה, יש לה רגליים שזה להשתגע, זה רגליים סקסית. נורא יפה.
תמיד שומעים אותך.
Thank you very much, Miriam. We continue with the response from Joanna Skowrońska from Poland. She's a training group analyst, supervisor, and teacher at the Institute of Group Analysis, Warsaw. She runs small analytic groups in private practice and staff support groups for health institutions, as well as individual and family psychotherapy. She is interested in factors Shaping Relationships in Group Analytic Psychotherapy and the Applicability of Groups in a Different Contexts. She published articles and book chapters in Polish and English, such as the psychotherapist's relationship with their own siblings as a factor shaping the therapeutic relationship. In Maciejewska et al., Siblings, Envy and Rivalry, Coexistence and Concern. What happens when you cut a word? Group members as peers in Ashwak and Berman, Sibling Relations and Horizontal Axis in Theory and Practice Contemporary Group Analysis, Psychoanalysis and Organizational Consultancy. The title of Joanna's presentations is Witnessing, a Group-Specific Factor and its Importance in Times when Facts and Truths are Challenges. Let's listen to Joanna, please.
Good evening, dear colleagues. Many thanks to organizing committee, Carla and Linde, for inviting me to comment on Miriam's Berger lecture. I feel honored to share my reflection triggered by Miriam's very interesting, emotionally moving lecture with such distinguished audience. Miriam said that facts matter just as much as an obliteration of facts does. But nowadays, we face such dismissal of or disregard for objective facts that some use the term of post-truth era. I found the following definition of this zeitgeist quite telling. Post-truth can be viewed as the result of an amalgam of different factors, some age-old and some very new, which are coalescing in this particular junction in time. Its emergence may be the result of many preconditions and enablers, some of which are ingrained in human psychology and group dynamics, others are more specific to the economic, social, and political realities of our times, which have paved the way for the rise of certain types of leaders, taking advantage of currently available digital platforms. These leaders have been successful in disseminating different types of narratives, messages, and ideas that have dislocated the notion of the truth from the pedestal it has occupied in time past. Seeing that obliteration of facts matter, in the same way as facts, it seems to me that in a time when facts and truths are challenged, the importance of witnessing what really happened and seizing it therapeutically in groups takes a new meaning and importance. Allow me for a small digression. Miriam's moving description of what happened in Rabka triggered a string of association in me, and I couldn't help but share them with you. I tell you my Rabka story. As it happened, the Rabka and surrounding mountain range have been for many years my favorite place in the world, where I could spend all my free time with my friends, family, my children. Miriam's retelling of what happened to her, her family, and their friends reminded me of an incident from my early youth. It was my first year at university. For the winter break, some friends and I set off to the mountains. In the middle of the night, we arrived at a small chalet, mountain chalet, with just one person in it, a middle-aged manager. The chalet has been, that year, it wasn't yet electrified. We were surrounded by night, silence, and darkness, broken by a flickering candlelight. Our house was behaving strangely. Can you hear? They have come. They are surrounding the house. Listen. We heard nothing but the cracking of drying wooden logs of which the chalet was built. Who has come? We asked in bewilderment. Peoples of Ogień, he said. The same name appears in testimony of Jerzy Cyns, quoted by Miriam. He wrote that a band of Ogień's people raided the house. Ogień, in English, the fire, was the nickname of the commander of partisan detachment that operated in this region during and shortly after the war. He took his pseudonym after the Nazi burned his family. He didn't lay down his arm after the war. Having tried to find his feet in the new political reality, he rallied his men and went to the forest again, so again became partisan. In addition to fighting against the new authorities and new Soviet order, his men, quite well-organized small army, committed crimes against civilians, Jewish, Polish, and Slovak. They became the terror of Podhale region, which is well documented by Jewish Historical Institute, Slovak and Polish victims. This year, disregarding of protests of numerous social groups, the government honored the memory of Ogień and his unit with a commemorative medal, and the official information about him posted on the website on the Institute of National Remembrance blames the communist propaganda for attributing anti-Semitism to him and the attacks on civilians. What happened did not happen. When I read Miriam's article and then Jerzy's testimony, I recalled this incident with the man I had met years ago. What if he too had come across Ogień's man in his childhood? He was probably at the same age at that time as Miriam. When we met him, we thought he must have gotten carried away by his imagination, sitting alone in this desolate place. We didn't give a credence to his words, we didn't ask him and did not let him to tell us his story. We assume we knew the truth. Witnessing is not a given, says Miriam. Where does the ability to witness come from? Miriam suggests that the tradition of practicing psychotherapy make practitioners wary to facts. But this attitude also has non-therapeutic causes. At that time, I was not interested in recent history or in social life at all. For my parent generation, it was a time when knowing, asking, to tell it, could put them in real danger. Although for my generation, it was not so anymore. It still could be a source of conflicting experiences, intrapsychologically and interpersonally. So I adopted an attitude, not uncommon at that time, of internal immigration. I wasn't until much later, when I started working with analytic groups, that my supervisor made me realize that I had to at least read newspapers to understand what members in my groups were talking about. In Poland, terms to witness, witnessing, for many evoke immediate association with the testimony of the Holocaust. This leads us to the foundation matrix as one of the sources of the ability to witness. In late 80s and early 90s, when I was developing my sense of citizenship, two dominating narratives about righteous and about Polish witness of the Holocaust took on the shape of traumatic narrative, oscillating in the semantic field delineated by such terms as isolation, powerlessness, passivity, unwarranted guilt, or, in the worst case, indifference or the thought of indifference. This narrative of dominant group permitted a wide range of responses, from indifference to sympathy and as far as to empathy, but not to an acknowledgement of facts. In years, this narrative gradually has been losing its legitimacy. My own perspective has been changed by the redefinition of the role of Polish community introduced by sociology professor Elżbieta Janicka. She questioned the legitimacy of this traumatic narrative. She postulated that the concept of Polish witness, in a sense bystander onlooker, should be replaced with the concept of participating observer, with the different understanding, of course, than the term used in field of cultural anthropology. She emphasized the importance of watching and observing. She wrote, thus watching could be a form of activity, a way of having an influence on events, of agency, and therefore a participation. This places Polish society in the framework rather than in the fringe, and creates a new, uneasy validation of what happened, which allows for question to be asked, curiosity to be raised, and creates a necessary space for recognition of guilt and responsibility for previous generations. Professor Janicka is undoubtedly a member of this group of people of various professions whom Miriam referred to, who studied the trauma of the Holocaust. Polish trauma psychotherapy owes much to the experience of group of psychotherapies centered around Professor Maria Orwid, who led long-term therapeutic groups for survivors and then for second generation. One of them is group analyst Katarzyna Prot-Klinger, my IGA colleague. She authored, among others, a very interesting approach in psychotherapy of trauma, where the therapist, reading her or his countertransference experience, witness what happened, could have happened, when trauma is transmitted through generation and written in the body of the person. All of the above constitutes a part of my context. I think each of the group conductors has their own context that determines how they deal with facts. Christopher Bolas, in Meaning and Melancholy, proposes the term oppressed and return of oppressed to refer to human thinking that has been forced to become suspended or distorted as a result of the overdetermination from the outside, as opposed to those that have been banished from the consciousness, as in the case of repressed and return of repressed. She wrote, "The cumulative effect of thousands of such failed possibilities formed a mental network of mangled ideas, half-formed and left disabled. The history of this sad evolution leaves the self at loss, in a state of unconscious grief, enduring mourning that, if it is gone unrecognized, can be endless. Although I fully recognize the accuracy of this description of intrapsychic situation, this definition lacks a relational dimension. The experience of overdetermination means that there is no one else who cares about some aspect of your experience, for whom your experience matters. And this has emotional consequences, ranging from loss of trust in the world and others to resentment and loss of empathy. It seems that nowadays, when we are faced with the overdetermination from the outside, consisting from disregard for facts, bewilderment with the variety of truths, which can result in mangled thinking, withdrawal to safe internal emigration, the ability to deal with real and readiness to confirm the real experience becomes even more important. It can be said that while trauma results in non-events, disregarding and twisting events creates a traumatizing social environment. Let me introduce a snapshot from my group. The meeting took place in fall 2021. A participant of a group, an activist, talked about her stay at the Polish-Belarusian border. There were the early days of the crisis, and we didn't yet know that a word exists to describe what our border guards were doing there, pushbacks. Regardless of how complicated the situation was and remains, the fact I shared with the group were beyond any doubt. It was November, and people who were in danger of dying from exhaustion, exposure to disease, or starvation were wandering in the forest near the border. They were being prevented from seeking asylum and were denied adequate medical care, food, and shelter. And people who, like A, wanted to help them were not only hindered, but treated as criminals. The existence of the problem, that is, of these people in general, were officially denied. Several truths on this subject floated around in social and media spaces. A was shocked, devastated, and outraged by what she had experienced there. I was aware of the situation on the border, and I got help. Thanks to the ethics committee of our institute, we met a psychotherapist and activist from this region who shared with us how she combined her therapeutic work with helping people on the border zone. We were able to think together in advance how to work with these facts in a group. The group fell silent. I felt for A. At the same time, I knew she was prone to engage in whistleblowing because of her family history, replete with many secrets and double twists. I worried about her safety and wondered is there anything I could do to protect her. One of the participants, B, broke the silence and quoted the official information, questioning the facts she cited and undermining her feelings. Someone else objected to B dismissing A's feelings. The silence thickened with tension. After a while, some people started reluctantly speaking. I have heard something, but I didn't want to know. I have heard something, but I turned a blind eye. I knew, but I didn't know. B, very moved, said, I believe, because you were there. At the verge of tears, he expressed the sadness that seized him when he realized the fate of the people in border zone. At the same time, he admitted that this puts him in conflict with his family, who shared the official picture of reality. We are leaving a group for a moment. Miriam called her experience of reading Jerzy's testimony a moment of meeting. It intrigued me. A moment of meeting is a dyadic concept. Daniel Stern and members of Boston Change Process Study Group applied a theoretical perspective derived from dynamic system model to developmental change to process of psychotherapeutic change. They build their theory on careful observation of system of dyads, mother and child, and then psychoanalyst analyzing. Miriam seems to suggest that the moment of meeting can also happen as a result of whole network of communication in the matrix. I have to admit that I think so too. A moment of meeting is an emergent property of the process of improvisational mutual activities, authors call them this moving along, in the direction of the goals of psychotherapy. When partners interact, some moments become hot, full of possibilities, the now moments. A now moment that is therapeutically seized and mutually recognized becomes a moment of meeting, writes members of Boston Group. It can alter the intersubjective environment and the implicit relational knowing, a kind of procedural knowing of how to be with the other in this therapeutic relationship, and what can be done together. They catalyze the change in development and in psychotherapy. The therapist can seize the now moment when he or she is real and authentic. Group, just like psychoanalytic dyads, are dynamic systems. If we assume that moving along of participants, including the conductor, in the dynamic matrix creates a multi-person system with emergent properties, we can expect that there is some group form of implicit relational knowing at group moments of meeting. The group analytic situation has some natural resources which Foulkes called group therapeutic factors. Some of them, such mirroring and resonance, are derivatives of human interpersonal equipment, the ability for identification and attunement. Others, like the chain reaction and the condenser effect, result from combination of the above and free-floating group discussion, improvisational being together. Later, some authors introduce other group-specific factors. Bente Tigensen suggests diversity, and Linde Wotton the unexpected. These are a part of the group analytic situation itself. They are waiting to be used therapeutically. They are allies of the emergent properties of a group situation. They favor the creation of a semi-safe space, a space with the potential for ruptures and repairs. I believe Miriam Berger's witnessing fall into this category. The group situation itself creates an opportunity for confirmation, validation, and recognition of both external reality and one's subjectivity. However, if this possibility is not used, quoting Miriam, non-recognition, denial, indifference, silencing, or just standing by becomes a fact on its own right, and reduce the value and impact of other group factors. Nick Barwick drew attention to the potential of being together in a group situation, which consists of the fact that each relational event has its own witnesses. He called group situation bearing witness training in action. This aspect of the group The model of free itself creates an opportunity to transcend linear relationality based on merging and polarization, creating a spatial relationship that promise the potential for perspective by proffering room for reflection. Ella Stolper introduced the concept of sibling witnessing, witnessing that is expressed publicly by the group of siblings regarding injustice. By sibling, she understands horizontal interaction in the actual presence of others, which gives a chance for witnessing of witnessing, recognition of wrongdoings, confirmation and validation of injustice that has occurred, change the position of participants from passive listener stance to live presence, as was the case with me when I came across the Janicka's redefinition. Let's go back to my snapshot. The group was confronted with the unexpected as the outer reality burns through the group's boundaries. Relational disorder, dominated by polarization, denial, dehumanization, and scapegoating that pervades the social fabric, was enacted in the microcosm of the group matrix, creating a now moment. The act of sibling witnessing of wrongdoing when B disregarded A's feelings started the movement toward the moment of meeting in the group. It was a chance to transform linear relationality into spatial relationality, in which witnessing and self-witnessing, self-observation is possible. As a group, we were able to experience the emergence of full range of attitudes, including defenses, toward the difficult truth, and then to become aware of and reflect on them. The painful feelings experienced in the face of wrongdoings to the other, in our names, unfortunately, could be experienced in the presence of others, so the denial and distortion of the facts could be avoided. I believe that in this moment of meetings, the group's implicit knowing what can be done together was expanded. Ruptured inner and outer worlds were fixed. External reality, of course, has not been changed, but it has become possible to restore trust in witnessing, in common consideration of reality creates a shared reality that can be the subject of knowledge and reflection. And this is the opposite to linear relationality with its polarization and merging. This can be a kind of vaccine against the spreading virus of post-truth. I believe that witnessing, one of the specific group factors, is an important resource of the group horizontal axis. Thanks to the authenticity and mutual engagement in shared reality, which is an intersubjective commodity, witnessing can enable the emergence of moments of meeting, moments in psychotherapy changing the intersubjective architecture of the relation. In the case of the group, the character of the connection in the network. The capacity to validate somebody's experience seems to be more crucial nowadays when facts and truth are challenged. Whether this emergent property of the group will be used for rehumanization in therapy and beyond depends on how the conductor handles the facts. Do they matter to her or him or not? Thank you very much.
לא.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Well, let's start with the questions and also with the integration with the people from online. This event is being chaired by